Hello, welcome again to Siempre Siendo Reformados. My name is Andres Martinez and I'm from Puerto Rico. The title of this video already tells you what I'm going to be talking about, so I don't have to say it. But I do feel I have to explain why even bother talking about this topic, because I realize that a lot of people have attempted to prove or disprove this dogma. So why even bother? Well, the truth is, the vast majority of people that I've encountered on YouTube talking about this, most of them are Roman Catholics, and of course I'm aware of James White's debates on this, but lone videos all over the place, most of them are Roman Catholics, and I disagree with them, and so I've studied the issue, and I know that there are good arguments from the Protestant side to respond to the arguments that are being put forward by Roman Catholics. So I simply want to pass on this knowledge and be one of those that are against this dogma publicly. So that's why I'm going to talk about this topic. And if you are a Roman Catholic watching this video, please do not simply dismiss what I have to say here. I believe that this dogma is wrong and that the arguments you guys put forth are wrong, but I want to demonstrate that to you in love. So I hope you don't simply dismiss this, and I hope you actually listen to what I have to say. So if you've watched my other videos, you know I always like to define the doctrines that I'm going to be talking about. So what is this dogma? According to Roman Catholic Catechism, paragraph 499, it says, "The deepening of faith in the virginal motherhood led the Church to confess Mary's real and perpetual virginity even in the act of giving birth to the Son of God made man. In fact, Christ's birth did not diminish his mother's virginal integrity but sanctified it, and so the liturgy of the Church celebrates Mary as the I Parthenos, the ever virgin." So what this actually means is, and a lot of Roman Catholics admit this, and in fact I've listened to Tim Staples saying that this is not something that has been infallibly defined by the Church, but it is the teaching of the Church anyway, and so Roman Catholics must give religious assent to the doctrine. I can leave the link in the description below so you can check that out. So this is the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church, and what am I referring to? Well, I'm referring to the fact that Roman Catholics believe Mary remained physically intact while giving birth to Jesus. So he remained a virgin, and as the paragraph says, Jesus' birth did not diminish her virginity in any way, but actually sanctified it. So this is one aspect of the dogma. The other aspect is, as we know, and as the next paragraph says, that they believe that Mary did not have other children besides Jesus, and so Jesus didn't have any brothers, at least actual brothers. So the first aspect, I'm not even going to bother to argue against it, because there's not an actual argument you can put forth to begin with. So I can't argue something that you simply don't have any proof. And if you're going to appeal to Ezekiel's text or something like that, good luck finding a New Testament writer who actually made that parallel. So let's take a look at the other aspect, the idea that Mary did not have other children. Now, before we take a look at the text, I want to make sure you hear this. If you're a Roman Catholic, listen. We Protestants know that the Greek word for brother, adelphos, can be used to refer to other people that are not actual brothers, blood brothers. We know that. That's a fact. So if you're going to argue that, you're arguing against nobody, because we acknowledge that and we know that. And I believe we both agree that context defines usage. So what you actually have to prove is that the context in the passages that mention Jesus' brothers actually suggest or demonstrate that these brothers they're mentioned are not actual brothers. That's what you have to do. And what I'm going to do here is demonstrate to you that the context does demonstrate that they are, in fact, brothers. Now, the first reason why they refer to actual brothers is this. In the New Testament, there is a word for brother in Greek and a word for relatives. And I have two biblical examples of this. In Luke chapter 14, verse 12, it says from the ESV, I'm going to be reading from the ESV, it says, "He said also to the man who had invited him, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives." It's adelphos for brothers and sungenes for relatives. So there you have the two words being distinguished and used to refer to two different kinds of people. And so if in Matthew 12 and 13 he was referring to relatives, he could have used the Greek word sungenes, but he didn't. And the next example is in Luke chapter 21, verse 16, where it says, "You will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and some of you they will put to death." So the New Testament has two words for these two kinds of people. And Matthew could have used sungenes, but he didn't. So now let's take a look at the text and see why in fact Matthew used the word adelphos. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 46, if you have an ESV, you'll notice that verse 47 is not in the actual body text. I discovered just yesterday that there's a textual variant there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the text, the body text, and the text in the footnote. Matthew 12:46 through 50, it says, "While he was speaking to the people, behold, his mother and his brothers stood outside asking to speak to him. Someone told him, 'Your mother and your brothers are standing outside asking to speak to you.' But he replied to the man who told him, 'Who is my mother and who are my brothers?'" Now, if we consider the fact that Matthew could have used another word if he meant relatives, and that the word adelphos used here is joined with the word mother, so we have a mother and brothers, that is direct family. What do you think actually Matthew is referring to? He's not referring to relatives. He's joining it with his mother. Those are his actual brothers. And if we take a look then at what Jesus says, it is more evident that he referred to actual brothers, because Jesus said, verse 49, "And stretching out his hand towards his disciples, he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.'" And so if these were not actual brothers of Jesus, then and if they were relatives and the people knew they were relatives, then the argument of Jesus would be something like, "These are my mother and my relatives, for whoever does the will of my Father is my mother and my kinsman or relative." Now that makes the argument of Jesus weak, and it makes it fall flat on its face. So the point that Jesus is making is that the person who does the will of his Father is even more close to him than a direct family. But to make that illustration work, it is more likely that Matthew and Jesus and the people are referring to actual brothers of Jesus, not to relatives or kinsmen. So contextually speaking, it doesn't make sense, the Catholic position in this text. It simply doesn't. So let's take a look now at chapter 13, verse 53. It says, "And when Jesus had finished these parables, he went away from there, and coming to his hometown, he taught them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, 'Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works?'" Now notice, they are referring to Jesus as a man. And now it says, verse 55, "Is not this the carpenter's son?" So here we have the man, Jesus, and his father, the carpenter, Joseph. Then it says, "Is not his mother called Mary?" So now we have the child, who is Jesus, who wasn't actually a child here, but he's already a grown-up man, but you get the idea. We have the child, Jesus, and we have the father, the carpenter, and we have the mother. So what do you expect to be mentioned next? What do you expect the word brothers to refer to? If we are seeing here being mentioned direct family, people who are part of a direct family. Those aren't relatives or kinsmen. They are actual brothers, and they are mentioned by name. Are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And are not all his sisters with us? When did this man get all these things? So notice that the people are astonished that Jesus has all this power. And they are saying, where did this man who has an earthly mother, an earthly father, and earthly brothers and sisters, where did this man get this powers and the rest of his family didn't? Why? So that's the point of the text. And if you make the word brother to mean relative or kinsman, it's not the same force. It's not the same astonishment. So we have direct family mentioned here, and the brothers of Jesus mentioned by name. Now, there are arguments that have been brought up. For example, the argument that Trent Horn, Tim Staples, and Jerry Matitix, and even this girl on YouTube who has a video YouTube channel, I think it's Lizzie's Answers. All these people make the same argument. In Matthew chapter 27, verse 56, there's this James and this Joseph mentioned, who are sons of another Mary. Okay, so you made that argument, but there's a problem. You forgot about Simon and Judas. So where's the mother of this Simon and this Judas? You can't actually point to their mother. Who's their mother? Is there another Mary? Is there another woman mentioned? No. So the fact is that these four people are brothers of Jesus, and they are mentioned by name. The context actually suggests that. So there's this other argument from this other text, Galatians 1:19, that I heard yesterday from Tim Staples. Galatians 1:19 says, let me look it up. Galatians 1:18-19 says, Then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas and remained with him 15 days, but I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. If you're hearing some dogs, I'm sorry for that. I can't do much about it. So Paul says here that he saw Cephas and James, the Lord's brother. Now, the argument that Tim Staples says is that there are only two James that are apostles of Jesus mentioned in the Gospels. That is John, son of Zebedee, and James, son of Zebedee, and James, son of Alphaeus. And he says this James, brother of the Lord here, cannot be a brother of Jesus because he's mentioned here as an apostle, and there was this other two apostles called James are son of other people. Well, the problem with this argument is that this visit to Jerusalem, which Paul is talking about here in this text, is also recorded in Acts chapter 9. And at this time, this is the first visit of Paul to Jerusalem after his conversion. At this time, both of those two apostles called James, son of Zebedee, and Alphaeus are alive. So when Paul writes Galatians 1:19 and mentions this James, instead of saying James, the Lord's brother, he could have identified this James as, he could have said that he saw Cephas and James, son of Zebedee, or brother of John, because he's the brother of John, or James, son of Alphaeus, but he didn't. He said James, the Lord's brother. He didn't identify this James as the son of Alphaeus, and brother of John, he didn't identify this James as James, son of Zebedee and brother of John, or as James, son of Alphaeus. He identified him as James, son of the Lord's brother. So, and this argument even gets more force when we take into consideration that Paul says he saw Cephas and James. And so if these two are apostles of Jesus, and of course Peter is not son of Mary, he is not brother of Jesus. If these two are mentioned and are both apostles of Jesus, they aren't any of them sons of Mary or brothers of Jesus, then they are of the same category. So why didn't Paul said, I saw Cephas and James, brothers of the Lord? He only identified James as a brother of the Lord, and that is significant. He didn't identify Cephas as brother of the Lord too. So the fact of the matter is, there's no reason contextually that you can say that these James mentioned here in Galatians 1:19 is not the brother of Jesus. So this James mentioned here in Galatians 1:19 is the same James, brother of the Lord, mentioned in Matthew chapter 13. He's the same James, brother of the Lord, who was in charge of the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15. And he's the same James that wrote the letter of James. So he is, in fact, the brother of Jesus. There's no way you can argue that he's not. Now let's take a look at another famous text, Matthew chapter 21, Matthew chapter 1, verse 25. Now, let's take a look first at verse 18. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. Now, this phrase came together. The Greek word used there can have different meanings, but in light of verse 25, we know it refers to sexual intercourse. So it says before they came together, before they had sexual intercourse, she was found to be with child. And now verses 23 to 25, let's read them. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. Now the word until, it has been largely debated, and the arguments that Roman Catholics put forth commonly is that the word until does not always mean that the action now is reversed when it gets to a certain point. Now, yes, the word until does not always mean that. In fact, this verse that talks about God the Father putting Jesus' enemies under his feet, that text does not mean that Jesus will stop reigning after this happens. Okay, that's true. But the fact is that the Greek word used here for until, it's not the Greek word heos alone, which is used in other places. It's not even heos han, which is used in other places too. It is the phrase heos hu. And this phrase heos hu, which is translated as until, in the New Testament, it is always used to refer to an action that up to a certain point in time has been reversed or has been changed. It always refers to that, and the challenge is for you, Roman Catholics, to provide an example of this Greek phrase used here being used in the way you want it and you need it to be used in this text. The fact is, you can, but that's the challenge. And since this phrase is always used in this way, in light of verse 18, before they came together, before they had sexual intercourse, she was found to be with child. In light of that, we take verse 25, but knew her not. Of course, that also refers to sexual intercourse. But knew her not until she had given birth to a son. So when she gave birth to a son, then Joseph knew her. That's what the text is communicating. That's what the Greek phrase always communicates. And you have to demonstrate that there are examples of that phrase being used the way you need it to be used. So that is the challenge we put forward to you. So I think that's all of it. That's all the biblical text that we need to discuss. So if you don't agree with these arguments and with these interpretations, just leave your comments below and let's talk about the issue respectfully and in love, seeking the truth of God's word. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you like this type of content. Thanks for watching. God bless.